Gill with Anime on Location, and we are here at Colossalcon 2013 with Louise Simonson. How did you get started in the world of comics?
I was working in advertising promotion in New York City. I had a friend who worked at one of the comic book companies, Warren Publishing, that published black and white comics, horror comics, and an anti-war comic called Blazing Combat, actually. I had read their stuff and enjoyed it, and she said, well, why don't you come and apply for a job? There's a job opening and you can do it, and it pays better than your job now. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And I applied for the job and got it. I was working in the production department, and that's how I ended up working at a comic book company. Eventually, it was a small company, and they would ask us, they would say, can anybody write ad copy? Can anybody do a letters page? And I'd always say, yes, I could, yes, I could, yes, I could, because you figure, how hard can it be, right? And eventually they just created an assistant editor position for me, moved me out of production into editorial. And then when the editor left, I went in and demanded the editor's job and got it after I made an offer the publisher couldn't refuse, which was, he said, girls can't do horror comics, can't edit horror comics. And I said, okay, what I will do is for 6 months, I will edit the line on my assistant editor's salary without an assistant. I will get everything on schedule, and I'll make it sell better than it did before. And I did. I mean, he's not stupid, right? He's gonna take a deal like that. He said okay, and I did, and I got hired as the editor of that line, and then eventually made the vice president of the company. It was a big fish in a very small pond, and then eventually, after 3 or 4 years, Jim Shooter asked me to come over and work at Marvel. So I went over to Marvel, and I edited there for a few years and got bored with editing when they hired a batch of new editors. And started writing stuff. And that's how I guess that's my whole story.
All right.
The end.
Can you tell us about your work on the award-winning Power Pack?
Okay. Well, that actually, the previous question was a good segue into the Power Pack phenomenon. Jim Shooter he hired a batch of new editors, and it cut everybody's workload in half. Now, I was doing just fine with my workload before. Shooter before this had been after the editors to do freelance work also, because he thought it would be good for them. But I didn't think it was fair, because I had writers who were depending on me for jobs, and I didn't want to steal any work away from them. So I said, well, gee, maybe I was bored because my work had been cut in half. And I said, well, maybe if I make up something, then I'm not taking work away from anybody. I'm actually making a contribution to the amount of work that'll get done. So I came up with Power Pack, 4 little kids who were superheroes. I went into Shooter and I said, well, I have this weird idea for 4 little kids who are superheroes. And he sort of rolled his eyes and he said, all right, well, maybe we'll get a mini-series out of it, write it up. So I did. And a young artist came through my office, June Brigman, who was looking for work. I didn't have any work for her since all my books were full. But I said, can you draw kids? And it turned out, yes, she could. She had practice in drawing kids for an amusement park, one of those portrait artists. And I said, okay, well, here, this is what I've got. I've got this project. Do sketches of the kids. And if I like what you did, I'll submit these to Shooter as us as a team. And she came back with these fabulous little drawings of the kids, and I took it in, wrote up my proposal, took it into Shooter, and Shooter flipped over it. He loved it. He said, I've seen worse proposals for major Hollywood motion pictures, blah, blah, blah. So you said, you've got a series now, and your first issue is due in 2 months. It was a double-sized issue, first issue. That was a lot of work for people who hadn't really done a comic before, but June and I managed to pull it off, and the book got very popular. We thought it would just be popular with little kids, but it turned out that there were a lot of grown-ups who liked it too, or older teenagers. So I guess that's the story of Power Pack as much as that's the story of the beginning of it anyway. Do you have any questions other than that?
Not when it pertains to Power Pack.
Okay.
But we
So you have more questions here, okay?
Can you tell us about your work on X Factor and New Mutants, two key series to a very big Marvel property?
Oh gosh. Okay. I can never remember the order in which I got started on doing other properties. I started off doing Power Pack. I guess when that book was well received, I got offers from other people to write other properties. I was asked to do a fill-in issue of New Mutants to get Chris out of a jam. Chris Claremont, who wrote the X-Men and New Mutants and a lot of other Marvel stuff, out of a jam. And I did it, and then several months later, Chris had decided that he wanted to create another X-Men property, which left the book open for another writer. And I guess they liked what I did as the in the miniseries, or the little fill-in issue, because they asked me to write the New Mutants. And I had been the editor on that a while back, initially when it was created. So I enjoyed, I did it. I said sure, so I did it, and it was fun. We had been asked to make the kids seem younger. Chris had been getting flack from his readers because the complaint was that the kids seemed too old. So my artist Brett Blevins and I took them back. We took them too young, and then we got complaints about them being too young, but that was all right. We eventually managed to work it out, and it was fun. We enjoyed it very much. Let's see if there's anything else you need to know. Let's see. We killed Doug, one of our characters, in I guess pretty soon after I took it over. He was a character that we got a lot of negative mail on. The mail on poor Doug would come in. We hate this character. We wish he would die. You need to get rid of him.
Still here.
His power was a very non-visual power. It was that he could translate languages. And the artist didn't particularly love him, so we said, all right, we'll kill him, but we'll send him out in a blaze of glory. So he saved somebody's life and died, and then we began getting letters saying, my favorite letter, the best letter I got on that one was, I used to hate Doug and think he was boring, but now that he's dead, I realize that he was always my favorite character. And that was kind of what we were getting on that one. So they still hate me because I killed Doug. But I never kill a character unless I know how I'd bring them back. So that's it. Anything else?
Can you tell us about Wolverine Meltdown and how it was to work with your husband on that project?
Oh, it was like working with myself. It was great. We co-wrote it, and how it would work is that we came up with kind of a general plot it was a 4-issue miniseries. Came up with a general plot, and then one of us would write along until we were just kind of getting tired, or we couldn't think of anything else, and the other one would come in and pick up where the other one left off. And it was the easiest thing that Walter and I ever did, I think. It was smooth as silk. We had a little bit of a concern in the beginning where the two artists who had originally asked us to do write the project for them, Kent Williams and John J. Muth, they had a kind of an artistic falling out, as in they found it impossible to work on the same pages. So we had to find a way to split the characters up into different segments so that Kent could do his part and Jay could do his part, and eventually bring the characters back together again. So we minimized the pages in which they had to share the art. But other than that was kind of just an interesting, just slightly interesting difficulty to have to solve. Okay.
Now, you also worked on a couple of Superman titles for DC. What was the experience like on those? What were some of the similarities and differences that you noticed between working for these two titans in comics?
All right. Okay. When I had worked at Marvel, I was working on projects in which I control. Once I had the character or the book, I controlled the whole storyline. At DC on Superman particularly, it was a different kind of production. There were 4 and then 5 Superman books. Each book was a chapter in the longer story. So rather than each book being the beginning, the middle, and the end of a story, it was chapter A or chapter B or chapter C of a particular arc. Now, every year or so, every one of the Superman team would get together, and we would work out a long story arc for the next year involving all of the books. It would be a very rough arc in which we would say, this had to happen and that had to happen. But how it happened was really up to the individual team. So it took me a little while to understand the pacing. Since we came in, my artist, John Bogdanov, and I came in as a new book that was created. And neither of us were used to working at that method. So it took us a little while to get the hang of it. Once we did, I think we did okay. We got to work on the death of Superman and the return of Superman, and that was a very interesting phenomenon and very successful. And we think it was one of the best projects that we had worked on. It really worked out. I created the character Steel as one of the alternate Superman. And Steele's gone on. He's still around, oddly enough. So it feels good to have worked on a character who is such a big American icon, and to have, I think, made us a successful contribution to his oof.
Do you feel that these comic books that are being turned into movies, like Man of Steel, which is going to be coming out very soon, do you feel that it's a benefit or a detriment to comics?
Oh, well, it's a benefit, I guess, in that any advertising is good for comics, but it does help if the movie is a good movie. If the movie's a bad movie, it isn't so good. I guess the Superman movie isn't out yet, so I have no idea if it's going to be a good movie or not.
Authenticity is important too, like the new Green Lantern movie. A lot of fans.
I know. Whereas the Marvel Thor movies, the Marvel movies have been fabulous. I mean, particularly the recent ones. I mean, there was some Fantastic Four movie wasn't not brilliant, but the Thor movie, the Avengers movie, those have both been those. They just know what they're doing. They get really the best people to work on them, and they get people who love the material to work on them, and who treat it straight. I mean, in a lot of cases, you have people coming in to do movies who think they can do it better. And they have not a lot of respect for the original material. And they change things around, and the fans don't like it, and a lot of times it doesn't make sense. The Marvel guys have done a phenomenal job of making the characters on screen behave like the characters in the comic book. It's like seeing a comic book come to life, and that's got to be good for the comics.
All right. How do you feel the comic industry has changed over the years, especially with these new distribution models that we're seeing?
Oh, it's in some ways it makes it more difficult. I love it that comics have become web accessible in a lot of cases, but I think it makes it maybe difficult for them to be profitable. I guess if they have subscriptions and stuff like that, it works out. I mean, you kind of want comics to reach as large an audience as possible, or any creative thing, anything you create, you want as many people to see it as possible, and I think that's great. I think that the web does that, but I also am concerned that if the companies don't make a profit from it, they're all going to fold and everybody will be out of a job. So, so far I think it works out. I think,
Absolutely. But there's always going to be that desire to, have a long box filled with, all of your...
And I think that what's happening now in a lot of cases is that I know that some of the independent guys who are creating independent comics will use the web as almost like advertising. They'll release things for free and then eventually collect their product, their intellectual property, into a book, and the book will sell because people recognize it from the web. So I think that model actually seems to be working for a lot of people. So I think it's great. I mean, there's no way you're going to stop progress anyway, so you might as well, see what you can do with it to make it work.
Go with the flow. Are there any current or upcoming projects that you can discuss with us?
Oh, gee. for DC, for the big comic book companies, what I've been doing is mostly working on kids book material. I worked on just recently on a series of ebooks that are sort of semi-animated for DC, but it's mostly aimed at kids. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm also doing educational comics, but I don't think that's part of this discussion.
It can always be made a part of it. Want to elaborate upon it?
No, I don't think I'm allowed to do that beyond saying that that I'm doing it. I don't think I'm not supposed to say anything more about it.
Well, do you have any final words that you'd like to get to the fans out there watching?
Oh Lord, I don't know. Just keep buying comic books. That's good. And if you like something, okay, here's something. If you like something, say it. Don't be intimidated by the people on the web who are griping, because they're a lot of times they're just trolls, and don't let them shout you down, because you are allowed to say you like things. Okay, that's it.
Louise Simonson, thank you so much for your time.